I wanted to point out that when we started the conference in 2012, we also decided that the first night of the conference, that we would invite someone, a speaker, who could set the tone for the conference. And that's why we reached out to Keith Kroll. He has taught for 14 years in the English department at Kalamazoo Valley Community College, and he has worked as a teacher consultant on classroom-based teacher research and has published a number of essays. Today, I kept thinking to myself, who is this person, Keith Kroll? I know that I've read his biography, but really, who is this man? So I decided to do some investigation. And so I ask you to listen carefully. You begin to learn about people when you read the people they quote. And thus, I went on his personal website. One of his quotes, "We don't have a right to ask whether we're going to succeed or not. The only question we have a right to ask is what's the right thing to do." Wendell Berry. Another quote, "Clive never wore neckties under the private conviction that all the political and financial mischief in the nation was created by men who wore neckties." Jim Harrison, the river swimmer. "In the 20 years since my own graduation, I have come gradually to understand these stakes and to see that the liberal arts cliché about teaching you how to think was actually shorthand for a very deep and important truth. Learning how to think really means learning how to exercise some control over how and what you think. It means being conscious and aware enough to choose how you construct meaning from experience. Because if you cannot or will not exercise this kind of choice in adult life, you will be totally hosed." David Foster Wallace, This is Water. A commencement speech at Kenyon College in 2005. And finally, research conducted by two-year colleges and universities has found that first-year students are far more likely to be successful if they participate in a course designed to teach them how to succeed in college. I think that we made the right choice. Introducing Keith Kroll.
Thank you for that introduction. I knew I should have taken my webpage down. By the way, one correction. I wish it was 14 years. Obviously, this gray hair shows I've actually been teaching at KVCC for 28 years. Yeah, I know, time goes by fast. So, it invited me to speak today. Andrew, being a good teacher, was very clear about my assignment, and I'll read to you what he said. Oh, that's good. He asked that I speak to the broader political terrain of teaching in the U.S., and specifically to the grand experiment of the community college and its struggle for survival against neoliberal economic and political forces. So, yeah, that was my assignment. So whether I'm a good student or not remains to be seen. And by the way, I'm going to end with that Wendell Berry quote. So, in keeping with the culture of higher education today, right? Accountability, assessment, competency-based credits, the completion agenda, performance-based funding, Lumina, the Aspen Institute, Eli Broad Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Arnie Duncan, and the fact that I just finished finals and brought portfolios with me. And by the way, I have to make the point, and all of you will understand this, I brought them with me. I'm not going to read them, of course, right? We know that. You bring them along to pretend like you look like you're going to read them, but we never do. So, in honor of all those people and those concepts and issues I just mentioned, we're going to start off with a quiz. Don't panic. It's one question. You don't need any kind of writing utensil. You don't need a blue book. You can ask your neighbor. And the question is easier than what first graders are now getting on the Common Core. So you should be able to do that. So, Maestro. Oh, sorry. By the way, if I actually knew how to use PowerPoint, we'd have music right now. And by the way, this would be the music. Dun, dun. Okay, that's annoying. Okay, I'll give you like 30 seconds. What is that? I heard what?
I said it's not pathways.
It's not pathways. It's general education requirements. Good guesses. I always tell my students, guess. Phil Knight says Americans don't guess enough, right? You know, the Nike guy? It's not how come it's not pathways?
Because it doesn't have buckets.
Doesn't have buckets, yes. I've learned about now you're talking about the CUNY pathways. I'm going to talk about the North Carolina pathways too. Any other guesses? General ed? Okay. Majors? It's majors. Anyone else? It's what? Yeah, it's the liberal arts and sciences. Don't be bashful. Okay. By the way, and I'll explain why English isn't up there. See that list right there? That's what's been cut out of the Applied Associate of Science degree at my college. I know what you're thinking, and I'll put something up here in a second for you. One of the saddest moments in my 28-year teaching career was when the Academic Leadership Council at my college, it's made up faculty. By the way, they really don't have any power, but because if the president walked in and told them to disband, they would. But anyways, there are 19 faculty members on that committee. 14 of them voted to cut those out of the AAS degree. 14 faculty members cut courses from their own programs. Seems amazing, right? 5 voted against it, and I'm proud to tell you one of the no votes was from the welding instructor. Seriously. Now, English was on there. So English was going to be cut from all AAS degrees. At my school, they call AAS degrees go-to-work degrees. I'm not, right? Yeah. Okay. Like dental hygiene, nursing, auto tech. So English was actually on there, and I'm going to show you a slide later about when we went to academies, what happened to English. But English was on there, and we had to fight to get English back. Not a literature class, but we had to fight to get a composition class back. And why do you think we got it back? They can't write. That was one of our arguments. But guess who got us the English college composition class back? The nursing faculty. Why did the nursing faculty want the class back? Had nothing to do with creative critical thinking. They want their students to learn how to do documentation, which is a very limited view of a writing class. Would all of us agree? But we did get the class back. So now I know what you're wondering. How is that how is that a degree? True? Anybody have that question? How can that be a degree? I sent it, after that was published at my college, I sent emails out to Thomas Bailey at Columbia at the Community College Research Center. Sent one to Arthur Cohen. You know he's still alive? That guy must be like 90. And a couple other people, John Levin at UC Riverside, University of California, Riverside. And I asked them, how is that a degree? And of course, they all came back and said, doesn't look like a degree. So I sent an email to Sylvia Manning, who's the outgoing president of the Higher Learning Commission, and I asked her, is this a degree? And this is what she sent me. I'm not good with PowerPoint. I think I can do this, though. By the way, the bold is me, and the italics is me. And the reason I italicize that, because when we had a meeting, and by the way, when I talk about administrators in my talk, it's not about anybody in this room, or faculty, we're special. So when I asked my vice president for academic affairs how it would be possible to cut all of those courses out of that, not even getting to the point, what are we doing to students, what kind of, quote, education are we giving them? He quoted that bottom part and told me, and I'm not making this up, I'm glad you're sitting down. Well, for example, the bottom part lets us, the nursing faculty can work I'm not making this up, can work political science into their courses. the auto tech people can like talk about history in their automotive technology classes. And that would, and guess what? That would meet that as it's written right now. Believe it or not. It's the part about through integrated, embedded, I know never read a PowerPoint, but interdisciplinary or other accepted models that demonstrate a minimum required equivalent. So right now, Sylvia Manning, she's outgoing president, told me, well, you know, it could work. I mean, if you embed them, so that's where we're at. So that's the answer. Those are all the courses cut out of the AAS at my college. So when I published the end of the community college English profession, which was the essay Professor Levi, that's correct, right? Okay. Read, and to which he invited me to speak today, a blogger at Inside Higher Education called it a standard lament. You know the guy that goes the Confessions of a Community College Dean? You ever read him? No? I never read him when he was, I don't read him now, but I never read him when he was anonymous, because I think you should take ownership of your work. But then he realized he couldn't get paid for speaking engagements and books if he didn't actually come out. So he outed himself about a year and a half ago. So, and the piece I wrote at the end of the community college English profession was a response to a Chronicle of Higher Ed piece written by a retiring community college teacher who questioned, asked, his title was, "After 40 years, has the grand experiment of the community college failed?" And so I thought, well, I'd try to give an answer to that. And my answer was, it looks like it's failing. I still have hope, but and that's what I'm going to talk about. So my main point then is that general ed and community colleges have historically been under attack, if you go back and look from the very beginnings. But I think it's unprecedented now. It's real and unprecedented what we're facing. For example, I think I can mention this, the CUNY pathways. How many of you are familiar, which I know there was a debate about that, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. How many of you know about North Carolina community college pathways? Have you looked at, you haven't heard about it? There's a reason why you haven't heard. Everyone, well, of course, everyone in this room's heard about CUNY, because we're from New York, you're from New York, but there's a reason probably why we haven't heard about North Carolina pathways, and I'll explain that to you. So, I was a little nervous being the first speaker at a conference because I'm going to come, you know, the end of the community college English profession doesn't exactly suggest happy thoughts. And if you're like leading off a conference, it's supposed to be really, you know, upbeat. So I didn't want to come across as like the grumpy old man who sits on his porch and, you know, get off my lawn at the kids. Of course, then I realized in New York that doesn't work, does it? Nobody has porches or lawns, so I was like, what would it be? Get away from my parking spot, or? So, okay. So I don't want to come across as the grumpy old man who's, you know, but we have seminar, professional development days at my college, and they're at the beginning of the semester, and they're supposed to get you really excited for the semester, and actually they make you so depressed that you don't want to show up on Monday morning, because now they're all about technology and Moodle. Do you have Moodle here? You don't? Do you know Moodle? Okay. I told you I'm kind of a grumpy old man. I refuse to use Moodle because I think it puts a block, obstacle between you and your students. Plus, just real quickly, just this past week, April 11th, we have our withdrawal deadline. A student came to me on April 10th. She was going to withdraw from 3 of her courses. She was passing, she was passing all 3. Every teacher used a different version of entering grades into Moodle, where one would be it's a running total, one was all the points were there, but they hadn't earned them yet, so she thought she was failing and she was actually getting an 85. So I tend to keep away from Moodle. I'm also not going to, we don't need that yet. We can keep it up there. I'm also not going to be as upbeat as Lloyd Blankfein was at his talk, his commencement speech at LaGuardia Community College last year. Are any of you from LaGuardia? No one from LaGuardia? Darn, we'll have to talk to him. You know Lloyd Blankfein, right? Goldman Sachs, the great vampire squid? Okay. So I'm not going to be that upbeat. By the way, that's sarcasm. Okay. So if you remember his rather short speech, he told his Horatio Alger story, right? We love Horatio Alger stories in the community college. President Obama tells one every time he makes a visit at a community college. Every State of the Union speech, there's a Horatio Alger story. And by the way, I tend to like those kinds of stories, I gotta be honest, because our students overcome tremendous obstacles, and we can tell those stories. I'm sure all of you in this room can tell those stories, right? Students who've done amazing things in their lives, working 2 jobs, single mom, going on to the university, doing great things, right? We all can tell it. But I have 2 problems with inviting Lloyd Blankfein to a community college. First of all, his story sends the message to our students that they're on their own, right? It's all about individualism. And if they only work hard enough, they too can have the good life promised by capitalist culture, right? Just work hard enough. We know that's not true. It's even harder now. I've taught college success strategies for 28 years. It's not a part of the English department, but I graduated from a community college, so I've always wanted to teach that class. I had to teach it. I had to take it when I was a community college student. I find myself, it's harder and harder to convince my students that actually getting an education is going to help them get a job, especially in Michigan. So then I tell them, well, no, you need an education. You don't want to just get job training. Of course, they say, well, what do I need this class for? Why do I need English? Why do I need history? I want to be a welder. Of course, they won't have to anymore. And I tell them, well, you have to get an education, but they've been trained and read so many messages over the years, right? Why do you go to school? Get a job, get a job. That's all we hear anymore. So I also think present company excluded that inviting Lloyd Blankfein to give a commencement speech at a community college shows how out of touch community college leaders, not the ones in this room, I mean that, are with our students' lives, right? Somehow they think that Lloyd Blankfein's the solution to the problem when Lloyd Blankfein's part of the problem. I mean, he made $67 million in 2007. He made $23+ million this year. I mean, my students can't really relate to that. So do you know, by the way, I had this as a question, was there any resistance to his talk? This is the month of being criticizing commencement speakers, right? It's all in the newspapers? Okay. Does anybody know, was there any?
I didn't even know he spoke there.
Okay. See, that's kind of part of the issue. That's one of my, if I have 1 point to make or 2 points to make today, that's one of them. Where was the resistance? Where was the voice? Shouldn't there have been some resistance at that college? Did any of the teachers speak out? Or maybe I'm wrong that, Lloyd Blankfein's a great commencement speaker. What about Susan O'Malley? They could have invited her, or Ira Shore, or Barbara Bowen, or Stanley Aronowitz. We just laugh when we hear that, right? Because they would never be invited, would they? They probably wouldn't have the same message that Lloyd Blankfein had. By the way, he only talked for like 15 minutes, so. I think it was his community service. Right. No, seriously.
Chuck Schumer shows up at our graduation every year.
Oh, okay. So he makes the rounds. By the way, we don't have one at my community college. I hate to admit this. I love my community college. I'm going to have a couple criticisms of it tonight, or today. But our commencement's more like drive-in restaurant. You sort of pull up to one window, get something, and you kind of walk across. We have no commencement speakers. It lasts like 45 minutes. It's just get them in and get them out. So you heard my assignment for today, and I pondered that, and I was struggling, like, how am I going to answer that? Everyone in the room's going to know what I'm talking about. They know all this. What I'm going to do? And of course, where did I find the answer? In a literary text. Just as we heard earlier, how the importance of literature. I was just beginning to read Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own with my students, and I came across the line, "One can only show how one came to hold whatever opinion one holds." And that was her line about giving the lecture she was about to give. And the interesting thing was, I had read that text before, And I had never marked that passage. And I'm like, God, there's the answer to my talk. My teaching career began in 1986, and sort of it's paralleled the unprecedented political and economic attack on community colleges beginning, I'd say in the 80s with Ronald Reagan's election, and then continuing from there. So I started in 86, a little bit into that. So before I go, what I want to do next is I want to address 3 assumptions about community colleges and then make 2 observations and then go on from there. One of them is, and this conference is a testament to this, is we are in fact a profession. Does everyone agree with that? We are a profession? Yeah? Okay. I don't I don't have to argue that, do I? I didn't think so in this group. So when I first wrote that piece, The End of the English Profession, I had a 2 or 3 page argument. We are in fact a profession because there's a lot of literature out there that argues we're in fact not a profession. Right? We have no distinct, unique identity. Cohen and Brower argue that. Townsend and Twombly argue that in the community college faculty, overworked and undervalued. I can quote them. They contend that there is little evidence that community college teaching is a unique profession. But when the readers of my early drafts, a couple of my colleagues read it, they said, you don't have to argue that we're a profession. We know we're a profession. There's even a book on it. It's called The Profession of English in the Two-Year College. It was written by Mark Reynolds and Sylvia Holliday Hicks, 2006. Here's the interesting thing about that book. There's no discussion of teaching literature in it. Right? Even more reason to have this conference, I think. Why no discussion of literature in a book that's called The Profession of English in the Two-Year College? You're lucky here. A lot of community colleges, a high percentage of community colleges, and I'll make this point in a minute, don't teach a lot of literature. They teach only writing. Here's another assumption I don't think I have to spend much time on. The general education and humanities matter. Does anyone in this room would argue with that? No. None of you would cut all of those classes, right? Okay. Well, it seems straightforward, but I just showed you what's been cut from. At a lot of places, they don't matter anymore. Here's another assumption that's an important one. I think they're all important, but not all community colleges are alike. I even have a slide on that. For example, we have a lot of colleagues around the country that don't even teach in English departments in community colleges. They teach in communication, right, department. They might teach in humanities, general studies. I couldn't quite figure it out, but just by looking at the program, I would make the claim, and I think I could support it if I had to, that the CUNY Community Colleges has the highest percentage of PhDs in the United States. At my school, having a PhD, they look at you like you're strange. Right? And I've sat on faculty hiring committees where they only wanted MA, the faculty on the committee said, well, we don't want PhDs. Right? We just MA. So CUNY is very different in that respect. The other thing on that is you have like a research requirement here from what I've understood. At my college, if you when you do research, I was telling Andrew and Margaret earlier, at my college, I hate to admit this, I'm the malcontent, and my best colleague, closest colleague's the loose cannon. And he does a lot of publishing too, and they look at us like, what's wrong with you? There's this more. The MLA did a study. There's a lot of community college faculty aren't tenured. Right? And then it was the New Century Foundation did a study. 86% of community college presidents would have us on renewable contracts. So, for example, the Wisconsin community college system, right? They don't have one. It's all technical colleges. Their university system has branch campuses. All their two-year colleges are technical colleges. Their branch campuses are freshman and sophomore year. So I have 2 colleagues that teach at Chippewa Valley Technical College. They teach 10 sections of composition. They don't even teach literature. If you get a literature class, you're lucky. Like they dangle that out there, right? 10 classes. Their teaching load is 5 and 5. You teach 10 courses a year, right? North Carolina. The reason I mentioned North Carolina's pathway, and you haven't heard of it, I have colleagues that teach in North Carolina. It's community and technical college. And by the way, one of them just sent me an email and said their pathways, quote, reeks. She teaches religion. That's been cut out. It's only elective now. So she figures in 2 years she won't have any students and probably no job in 3 years. It's interesting. They didn't have, in their pathways, they did not have American Lit and American History at first as transfer, as required general ed, and then they did get that back. But here's one of my arguments why you haven't heard about the North Carolina, I told you I was kind of a grumpy old man, why you haven't heard of North Carolina's pathways probably. They don't have tenure. You have tenure here, right? Keep that, right? They don't have unions. And they work on one-year contracts. Great, right? So you're not going to get much resistance from the faculty there to pathways when you're on a one-year renewable contract, you have no union, and you don't have tenure. And as the earlier statistic I put up there, right, most of us don't work without tenure. Here's the interesting thing, though. Tell me if you think this reminds you of a Cheers episode. They have titles. Titles. So if you teach at a North Carolina community college, you can be an assistant professor, associate, or full professor. Which every time I say that, it reminds me of that Cheers episode where Woody and Sam went in to get pay raises and came out with new titles. Remember that one? Woody went in first and came out, and Sam said, "Did you get a raise?" He said, "No, but I got a title. I'm like assistant bartender." And Sam said, "You're an idiot." And then he went in to see Rebecca, and he came out. And Woody asked him, Did you get a pay raise? He goes, "No, but I got a title. I'm like full bartender." Remember that? I always think about North Carolina. I always tease my colleagues that teach there. I have two really good friends, like, you have titles. What are they based on? Longevity. I think we all know this one, right? What more could you say about that? I don't know. Is that correct about Borough Manhattan? That's from the government. So, when I wrote the end of the community college English profession, that fourth bullet was the school I had in mind. You should look up Rio Salado Community College sometime. It's about 100% part-time. It's mostly online. The only full-time faculty they have are like managers, and they just manage all of the part-time faculty. So that was sort of my dystopian vision of the future of the community college would be Rio Salado. And if you look, their retention rates and graduation rates are horrible. I'm embarrassed to admit this. I don't know if in the Chronicle, my school, in terms of part-time faculty, we had to have a canned food drive last year. So you know how we talk about the it's hard to say, the Walmartization of education? It really should be the educationization of Walmart. What happened at my school was they weren't, you might have read, it made the Chronicle, and the photo in the Chronicle, it's my only national photo credit, is me. I took the photo with my cell phone of the canned food lineup. But what happened was my school, for some reason, decided they weren't going to pay the part-timer adjunct faculty until like 7 weeks into the semester. And you think, who cares? Well, to be honest, and I think most of us in this room know this, a lot of part-time faculty live on their salary. So there were a number of faculty who couldn't pay for their prescriptions, who weren't going to have enough food. So we actually had a canned food drive before Walmart did theirs, I want you to know. Remember Walmart had that food drive at Christmas? We did it first. So we had a canned food drive about our... So that's why when I go to 4Cs, I'm always taken aback about those grand pronouncements about writing and what's going on in writing, because 75% of the people who teach writing aren't even in the room. How can you make all those grand pronouncements about that? Right. How many of you in this room attended a community college? Oh, a few of us. Oh, very good. I had to. In high school, I was the bottom part of the class that made the top part possible. In honesty, I hated high school. So in California, you only had to be 18. So, how many of you have taken a community college class? You know, like history of? Okay, a few hands. That's not bad. I'm guessing most, when you come out of a traditional MA or PhD, how many of you went through a traditional MA, PhD program? Okay, most of you. They didn't offer a community college class on the community college, did they? Did they even encourage you to teach in the community college? Oh, very good. I was actually at the University of California. I was actually discouraged from teaching in a community college. My professor's like, what the hell? Why would you want it? You know how much you have to teach? So I'm like, yeah, but I went to one and I believe in them. I want to teach at one. And they're like, you don't want to keep going to school here then. All right. So, true story. I think you need to understand the community college history to teach in a community college, to know what's going on. You have to know that early on, right from the beginning, the early leaders of the community college wanted it to be a vocational school, right? All the early lit. It didn't have a place in the in higher ed. They weren't going to fight the four-year schools, though they're trying to do that now by offering bachelor's degrees. By the way, I don't know this. I'm just saying this off the top of my head. I can't imagine that's ever going to happen here because of your close relationship with the CUNYs. That, like, Borough Manhattan's never going to become a four-year school, right? As it's happening in Florida and Michigan. I just don't see that happening. Maybe? Oh, wow. Okay. I think you need to know, I shouldn't have, well, I'll keep that up there. I think you need to know about the Truman Commission. What a great title, Higher Education for Democracy. The Truman Commission is what gave us the word community in community colleges, right? They used to be junior colleges. I think community is a great word. It's now a dirty word, right? It's being cut out. You could become a four-year school and still have the name community college. I would argue. But you read the literature that, international students, they don't know what a community college is. And we want to attract international students because they pay a lot of tuition, right? Or you'll read, in my state, for example, Jackson Community College became Jackson College. Not that that's going to attract anyone, but their board of trustees said, we need to get rid of the word community because community college is really negative. Students don't like community colleges. It's a pejorative term. I'm like, really? I love community colleges. So I think you need to know that history. You need to know, I'll go back. I think we need to know, in understanding what's going on now, a document called Building Communities, which was the AAC. Are you familiar with that document? No. Neither is the commission that wrote the second one in 2012, because they're both from the AAC, but they make one brief mention of building communities and higher education for democracy. And I think they do that on purpose because they don't want to have to deal with what those two documents talked about, which was community and general education and the importance of a democratic education and citizenship. Have you looked? So in building communities, community college teachers are called scholars. That's a great term, right? They talk about building community as a region. They promoted general education. Have any of you looked at Reclaiming the Dream besides its banal title? Can we use that one anymore? Is anyone familiar with that document? No? Interesting. No, you're not missing a whole lot. I hope it gets, relegated to the dustbin of history. It might not. It's the latest vision of the American Association of Community Colleges of the 21st Century Community College. So they had a vision in 1988, which was building communities. Their new vision is reclaiming the American dream. That's the amount of faculty involvement on their commissions. The Team 4 one depresses me the most. Right? They're talking about redeveloping developmental education. They have 0 community college faculty members on that commission. 0. How can you redesign developmental education without any faculty input? And what Walter Bumpus, the head of the AACC, will tell you is, well, we went around and had these. They might have come. I'm sure they came to the CUNY Community College at some point. Well, we did these visitations, and you could come hear us talk and give us your input. No faculty members. That's one of my, one of my main points. Where's our voice? Right? The only sort of saving grace about this is the AAC really has no political power either, right? Do you remember? They really don't. There was back in 2009, President Obama announced the American Graduation Initiative at Macomb Community College. It was going to be $10 billion, ... Remember that? Then it got cut out of the health care bill, the reconciliation bill. Where was the AACC? Just standing there going, okay, well, we'll take anything you can give us. Okay, now to some good news. Any questions, by the way? No? I told you, again, I was kind of a grumpy old man. So here's good news, and it's about literature, the power of literature and how literature can be transformative. When President Obama was elected in 2008, one of the headlines read, "Dream Accomplished." Remember that? So, and I think it referenced King's speech and Langston Hughes. So I was walking down the hallway, a student ran up to me and said, "I understand the headline." She was excited, right? I got it. I didn't ask her anything more, but I was happy, and I understood why. She understood some kind of deeper meaning in that title, right? Dream Accomplished. She had a relationship. That's the power of literature. But I can hear my dean even, by the way, just as an aside, I still think The Onion, Black Man Given Worst Job in America, was the best title. Remember that title? Yeah. But even now I hear my dean. What would he say to that event? A student running up to me and said, "I understand it. I got it. That title means more to me," because we had read King's I Have a Dream speech, and we had read Langston Hughes in class that semester. What my dean would say is, how do you measure that? What's the metric we can use for that? Which then demands that I or we respond in the language of metrics, right? That we defend literature in some instrumental manner, that its value is only in what can be measured. And we know that's not true, right? It's hard to argue, well, my gut tells me it's meaningful, but that's the way I do. We'll go on. I had another email from a former student teaching in France. She wanted to teach a short story. She was a student like 8 or 9 years before. She wanted to teach a short story we had read in English 111, but she couldn't remember it. And I was happy she didn't Google it. The story was about some girl who comes across a really creepy guy, and then he shows up at her house, and she talks at him through the screen door. "Keith, what was that story? I want to teach it." I'm like, yeah, of course. Joyce Carol Oates, right? Where are you going? Where have you been? Now, Carly didn't say in her email why she wanted to teach that, but I don't think it's because she hated the short story. I think it meant something to her, right? I also teach literary theory. I use Jim Harrison's idea and tell my students, in literary theory, you're the ornithologist, not the bird. So I was standing talking to the faculty receptionist, talking to them. Student comes up to me, she's dropping off a paper for another class, looks at me and says, "I hate you." And of course, the receptionists are looking at her like, "What?" I said, "You hate me?" And she goes, "Yeah, I can't watch a film anymore without analyzing it through I won't even put it the word she said, through a feminist lens." Like, that's a good thing. She looked at me and said, "I don't think my husband and kids think so anymore." Right? So literature and literary theory is consciousness raising. It's transformational. We know that, right? We know that in our gut. Everyone in this room knows that. But I just don't think we make the case strong enough or public enough that that's important. Writing can serve the same purpose. Ken Bain, in his new book, What the Best College Students Do, has one of my former students in it, which I didn't even know. His name's Tom Springer. Tom Springer entered KVCC, and you can read this in Ken Bain's book, What the Best College Students Do, as HVAC. You know, heating and air conditioning, right? He had to take 110. He did not want to take 110. It's the last thing he wanted to do. And I'm going to be honest, I teach that class as, I shouldn't be, it could be dangerous, but I prefer memoir writing to academic writing. My students, I think, gain greater literacy in their writing. It's more meaningful to them. I know I shouldn't say that because we're supposed to teach academic writing. But so he enrolled in that class, right? Much against his will, became an unbelievable writer, and is now published a couple of books and is a writer for the W.W. Kellogg. Right? Now, I'm not sure Tom Springer would even end up in an English class. Right? It's not even going to be required anymore because he went on to take other English classes. So here's one final vignette real quickly that's stuck in my mind. Creative writing teacher was sitting with a student last semester in the lounge going over paper. And of course, I'm nosy, and I walked up and I said, creative writing student, English major. And she looked at me, said, this quote's interesting. She looked at me and said, I'm an accounting major. But it's this next sentence that's just stuck with me. Creative writing is for me. So, I mean, that's a good thing. She made the decision to take that class, but there's a division there, a divided life in there that we've created now, right? Somehow, who is she taking? She's an accounting major. Who's that for? It's not her, right? Creative writing is for her. And I'll give you some context for this. I have a friend, Dennis Heinrichsen, who's a good poet. He taught creative writing at Lansing Community College for 25 years. His dean came up. Deans in Michigan are the worst ones, not New York. His dean came up to him and said, this is after 25 years, seriously, I meant that. Their administrators are great, except in Michigan. Do you ever remember Mr. Holland's Opus? Remember when he's leaving his job? He's talking to the principal, and principal goes, well, they like you. And he looks at him and goes, Gene, you don't understand it. You're the enemy. So Dennis Heinrichsen's teaching creative writing at Lansing Community College, whose president is on of course, Reclaiming the American Dream. And the dean came up to him and said, by the way, creative writing is now, quote, a leisure course. Only part-timers will be teaching that. So he had 25 years and he quit. He retired. So I admire him for that. A leisure course. I think we'll see sessions today, tomorrow, and Sunday that prove that it's more than a leisure course. I had to put this on a PowerPoint. This is the president of Macomb Community College. You have to, because I could read it to you. You have to read this, though. You have to read this. And by the way, Jim Jacobs is, on every committee that President Obama has. Jim Jacobs is on Reclaiming the American Dream. Look at, I italicized it, so I cheated. Look at the last part of that. And think about my student who said, I'm an accounting major, right? Creative writing's for me. You even have to hear it out loud. It's to better prepare students for the world that exists, not the world they want to live in. What kind of mindset is that? Here's my response. I wrote it down. Because our students shouldn't have a world they would want to live in or change the world into one they would want to live in. They should serve the world that a small number of rich people want them to live in. I mean, that was my interpretation, right? So, how am I doing time-wise? Am I all right? A few more minutes? Am I good? 6 minutes? It's 6 minutes. I'm not one of those people who go, I'll get to the end, rush, because that's for tomorrow's sessions. So how did I get here? I'm not going to go back to 1986. I'll go back to 2006, which is almost like 14 years. So, do you remember the Spellings Commission? Remember that report? We wished it went into the dustbin of history, but it's still around us. If you want to know where Common Core language came from, look at the Spellings Commission. If you want to know where rating colleges came from, you know, Obama, they're going to rate schools of higher ed, look at the Spelling Commission. What was the standard? The standard lament from all of us in this room about the Spellings Commission was what? It made no mention of the humanities in the future of education. Remember that? No mention. As a result, higher education, according to that report, should focus, see if you recognize this, on testing and technology to provide the job training skills necessary to make our students competitive in the 21st century marketplace. Sound familiar? Yeah. So then I'll jump ahead to 2007. I'm sitting in a meeting, a college-wide meeting with our president, and she made this statement. And I put in bold the part that kind of struck me as, that got me upset, right? Some students just don't have the luxury of time and money for the traditional path. Of course, next question I ask is, what students are you talking about, by the way? Yeah. Well, we know what those students are, right? What's the fastest possible way? So we started all these academies, automotive, welding, wind turbine. You don't take any general ed. They're all just credit-based, and they're expensive. The first automotive academy was $7,000, and then after that, they would be $12,000. So I saw this as, first of all, cutting into the humanities, getting rid of general ed, and also the privatization of the community college, right? By the way, where's the Auto Tech Academy now? Gone. Ran 3 times. Why did it go away? No jobs, right? So what do? We start the animal technician program. They tried to start it in 2008. Oops, bad timing. Right. It didn't last. So after this meeting, I decided I was going to put the literature books away for a while, which is really depressing. I do not recommend that. And see what was going on. And the answer I came up with was I looked at globalization, I looked at technology, and I decided that I think Henry Giroux was right on. That's where the end of the English profession came from. And Henry Giroux writes a lot about neoliberal political and economic policy. And I had to go take a few economic classes at Western Michigan University, which is about a mile or 2 from my campus, casts a huge shadow. So, very, very short definition, neoliberalism is basically free market fundamentalism, right? The market, free of government intervention, controls all economic enterprise. Its goal is nothing short of the dominance of public life by giant corporations. It's the world we live in. A central tenet of neoliberalism is austerity. Think about what's happening to education. It's right, full-time equivalents dropped in every state, though it's starting to come back. In Arizona, the Maricopa Community College District, right, it gets 1% of their budget from the state now. Arizona is one of the worst states. It led them to start the corporate college. Have you followed that, the corporate college? Which is now, here's what their district chancellor said. He said, corporate CEOs have realized that the district is now starting to market ourselves as a business. Well, at least he's honest. Community college is, it's a business. In California, and I'm sure you've read about this, it was in the paper a lot because that's a huge system. In California, where I attended the community college, they sustained $1.5 billion in budget cuts between 2007 and 2011. 800,000 students couldn't get seats in classes, led to cuts in faculty, courses. Here's a historical comparison for you. When I attended Mount San Antonio College in 1976 to 1979, I paid $26 a semester. That was it. That's the equivalent of $110 today. Right now, in this academic year, Mount Sac costs $760 a semester. I had to ask a guy in the math department at my school to figure out what that was. It's 2,000+% increase. That's way over inflation, by the way. Right? So they're pricing people out, though they do have waivers. So then here's Giroux on neoliberalism. It's a long quote. I want to just focus on the wants part. Because most of his books, he focuses on four-year universities. But see the wants? all those wants, right? What neoliberalism wants to do, eliminate tenure, turn the humanities into job preparation, all those wants are already happening in community colleges. Right? English classes remain because they're utilitarian. Literacy is narrowly defined. The English department becomes a service department. And that's an extreme idea, right? Humanities being cut until we realize what's going on. So the question I always ask is, where's our voice, any voice in resisting this? I know we're busy. I don't think we're overworked, by the way. I know I could get boos and hisses by that, right? Community colleges, we enroll 45%, right? 45% of all undergrads. 42% of all first-time students. We're not in any of the books. Maybe a brief mention in any of those books, Martha Nussbaum, Manon, all those. A brief mention. How could academically adrift be the definitive study of undergraduate education when it came out, and they didn't include community colleges? I asked Richard Aram that when he visited Western, and he said, well, they weren't part of our cohort, but they're important. Right. So Derek, you remember Derek Bach, the former president of Harvard, in his book, Underachieving Colleges, in a footnote, he made this comment. He was going to leave community colleges out because they seem different enough from four-year colleges that they will not be treated. It was in a footnote, right? He left them out. Different enough meaning what? The community colleges only offer the first 2 years of undergrad education, or I think what he really meant was because they're not really educational institutions, right? So then I decided I was going to ask Jill Biden why she wasn't talking about community college education. Talks about training all the time. Though in fact, she's just going with the vice president. Hopefully, and she's probably busy teaching. I admire her for that, by the way. So I wrote a piece asking Jill Biden why she didn't talk more about education. It was always job training, but she never replied. So my biggest disappointment is right there. When he dumped Linda Darling Hammond for Arnie Duncan, we probably should have known right then. But the narrative over the last, that's the Bush narrative too, so it hasn't changed. That's the narrative of the Obama administration in community colleges, right? We're job training centers, we're community career centers. All the funding's focused on job retraining. Time Magazine called him the community college president, but actually a lot of that funding's never gone through, right? The community colleges to career fund was in the latest budget, but it's unfunded. It's in there, so it looks like it's there, but there's no appropriations for it. And so then community college students become, a workforce or workers. They're not citizens. So the tragic flaw in the administration's focus on job training is that it's not a panacea for the neoliberal political and economic policies that have created an unfair, unequal, and unresponsive economic environment, one that has seen the wages, benefits, and standard of living of working Americans plummet. There's strong evidence that the skills gap, which we always hear, is a myth, right? It's really about a lack of jobs. It's about a lack of jobs in Michigan. As Paul Krugman, I think, put it well, Paul Krugman, who's now part of CUNY, right, or will be, this is what Krugman said: moreover, by blaming workers for their own plight, the skills myth shifts attention away from the spectacle of soaring profits and bonuses, even as employment and wages stagnate. Of course, that may be another reason corporate executives like the myth so much. Well said. As a result, instead of being educated to make informed choices of their own, our students are being thrown back into the dependent and subservient positions during a time of widening economic equality and unequaled peril. Instead of being educated to insert themselves into the political process of restructuring a society of fair values, they are being trained to stay out of the way and hope that their wages, which haven't kept pace with corporate profits, will be enough to feed their children. Simply put, job training and workforce development is indoctrination. By the way, I'm not against job training. I went to a community college. It just doesn't have to be one and not the other, right? Students need to be educated too. It's not education. It's no socially constructive or just outcome. It's a failure of everything that a liberal arts education, what all of us in this room value, contributes to a just and democratic society. Furthermore, job training will not change the corrupt values of Wall Street or bridge the gap in wealth that has grown from unseemly to grotesque. The argument currently being made that people need jobs, any jobs, first, and that justice and political enfranchisement can wait is backward. The way forward for those just entering higher education and for the millions of displaced workers is not another dead-end job or soon-to-be outsourced job with few or no benefits. The way forward is an educational system grounded in ideas of critical literacy, social justice, and democracy. And I would just add, there are people fighting for that. I would use the PSC's fight against the CUNY pathways. I know you didn't win the lawsuit, but I did read that the 3-credit limit was overturned. Within cities, San Francisco is a great city, and they are putting up a fierce battle. Students, teachers, right, and citizens to save the Community College of San Francisco. If you know anything about San Francisco, that school is vital to that city. And, they're under threat to lose their accreditation. On campuses, they got rid of the, my campus students are protesting Hire One. Do you have Hire One here? It's like you put all your financial aid on a debit card. Oh, you don't have it? Excellent. It's not good. They charge them really high rates for transferring their money. It's crazy. Students at Santa Monica College protested the 2-tiered courses when those were announced. You remember that? To make money, it got so bad in California, if you could pay enough, you could get into like English, a composition class. They fought that, got rid of it, but Governor Brown's trying it. So I think the sessions over the next 3 days, I looked at the titles, will demonstrate the importance and transformative power of literature and creative writing in the community college classroom. I mean, it is alive and well. This, by the way, you're lucky. This conference is not typical of what's going on at community colleges, believe me. But we can no longer simply close our classroom doors. If we do so, we close them of our own peril. Neoliberal political and economic policy disguised as education policy, I don't even think it's education policy, is not going away no matter who's occupying the White House. It won't if Hillary Clinton is in the White House. It won't if it's Jeb Bush. Maybe Elizabeth Warren, if we can get her to run. It's seeping under our classroom doors. And though it may not seem readily evident to you now, though I think it should, it's poisoning what we do and what we cherish. I always wanted to just close my door. I mean, teaching's a solitary act, right? I don't even see people on my campus anymore. Most of them are teaching online. But you can't close the door anymore. We do so at our peril, and we need to become more vocal. And so I'll end with that. So what's the right question? What's the right thing to do? I love this quote. I'm glad you read it, because thank you. It's the last part of it, too. We don't have a right. I love Wendell Berry, by the way. He's one of my favorites. The only question we have a right to ask is, what's the right thing to do? And I think the right thing to do as community college teachers, push back. At least have a vocal public voice. Put up some resistance, right? I mean, you can say, well, nothing's going to happen to me. I can teach my lit class. Yeah, it's happening, though. Maybe not here, but it is in other parts of the country. It's happening at my school. You saw that first list. I mean, I'm embarrassed to put it up, but they're doing that, my favorite quote, the governor of North Carolina. Oh, good, done. Governor of North Carolina said, it's no longer about access. This is his quote, it's no longer about butts in seats. It's about how many of those butts get jobs. So, thanks.